the 6th of October, 1976. Scotland, Hogwarts. For 6th year Gryffindors, Wednesdays brought only 2 classes, the first and last pair, Defense Against the Dark Arts and Charms. Charms had been taught since the beginning of the year by the half-goblin Phileas Flitwick. He was a dwarf with a rather forbidding appearance, a prominent nose and small eyes beneath bushy eyebrows. If Sirius's memories were to be believed, the subject had once been called enchantment, and had been taught by another professor who had retired. Last year, Flitwick had taught Defense Against the Dark Arts. However, in the very first lesson of this year's Charms, they were informed that a decree from the Ministry of Magic had reformed the education system, abolishing the previous division between male and female magic. Now it would simply be Charms, a subject for everyone, boys and girls alike. Many were unhappy with this change, especially the female students, as their former professor, Rolandu Hooch, had been dismissed and reassigned to be a flying instructor for the younger students, a position she had reluctantly accepted. Rumors circulated throughout the school, ranging from Hooch drowning her sorrows over her demotion and inability to teach her beloved subject, to the notion that Flitwick's goblin relatives, who held sway over Gringotts Bank, had influenced this unification of the Charms. The same Ministry of Magic initiative had also led to the abolition of the optional class Dark Arts, which had already been made an elective in the first split, creating Defense Against the Dark Arts. And now it was to be abolished altogether. But Sergei doubted that such cancellations would make any difference. If anything, they might make the children curious about what was forbidden. Learning the dark arts was a matter of writing essays and doing homework. It wasn't as fascinating as it might seem. It was a regular subject, like many others at Hogwarts. Besides, as Sirius's memory suggested, many of the dark arts required a considerable amount of security during lessons, and now, young and inexperienced wizards would be left to experiment in empty classrooms, causing more problems. Sergei's Wednesday schedule coincided entirely with Regulus's. For 4th year Slytherins, Transfiguration was the first class of the day, followed by Herbology as the last. Regulus didn't attend Muggle Studies, which was scheduled for the second period of 4th year. 6th year Slytherins had an even freer schedule on Wednesdays, with only one Charms class, but it was in the 4th period, from 2:30 to 4. It seemed that students were expected to spend their free time studying independently in the library, but Sergei had found more interesting activities for his Wednesday afternoons. September 11th, nearly a month ago, Sergei decided to talk to Severus Snape and confess that he had been the brief familiar Raven. It was quite the test of strength. The three of them gathered, Severus, Regulus, and Sergei, in that ill-fated empty classroom on the 2nd floor. But this time, Sergei locked the door to ensure no interruptions, especially from his friends.
What do you want, Black? I'm rather occupied.
I wanted to share a story with my brother, and since you're an interested party, I'm offering you the chance to listen as well. Sergei casually took a seat on a desk.
Do you want to explain where you disappeared to?
Yes, Sergei collected his thoughts. My concussion over the summer. It led to me losing some skills and memories. We were practicing spells. I decided to train my Animagus transformation at Hogwarts. Animagi forms are easiest to shift into during the full moon, so I was waiting for it to try. Unfortunately, I was overconfident and didn't invite you, brother. Although I could have guessed, yes.
Sirius, so you're an Animagus? I had no idea. Wow, that's cool. Will you teach me?
It's possible, Sergei considered, glancing at Snape, who remained silent, leaning against the wall by the door. However, due to my concussion, my Animagus form changed. And I panicked because I wasn't familiar with that body.
What was your previous form, and what do you transform into now?
Regulus's eyes lit up. Before, I turned into a healthy black dog, Sergei answered, noticing Snape flinch and clasp his hand over his shoulder. But unexpectedly, I transformed into something other than a dog. I turned into a bird.
A bird?
Regulus asked, somewhat disappointed. Yeah. And then, like a fool, I transformed into a bird, but suddenly forgot how to revert, probably out of fear and surprise. Sergei continued, feeling Snape's penetrating gaze on him. I didn't really have time to think, because I started flapping my wings, and they were so awkward. I shouted, and just then, Slytherin upperclassmen entered the room. They caught me on the spot and said I was such a bird, even though I couldn't understand it myself.
Geez. That's something else.
Yeah, the situation was something else, Sergei nodded. But that's not all. They said I was a raven and decided to train various spells on me. Did I really need them to turn me into pictures or some other nonsense? Especially since I couldn't revert, and panic and stress turned my mind into mush. That's when I remembered about familiar ravens, and that they could talk. So, I tried to say something like, "Back off and put me where you found me." Regulus chuckled. It's funny to you, but it didn't work for me at all. I even tried saying your name, like I was your familiar, but it didn't work either. It's just too long and 3 syllables. And when I thought about those syllables, I remembered who has only 1 syllable in their name, and you know what? It just came out so naturally, as if I'd been doing it my whole life. Regulus snorted and looked at Severus. Exactly, Sergei sighed. The upperclassmen immediately identified me as the familiar of our mutual acquaintance and dragged me to him. And I thought, as the cleverest Gryffindor who managed to magically acquire troubles, that I'd just sleep it off in a cage. By morning, when everyone leaves for breakfast and lessons, I'd remember everything calmly, revert, and escape from your dungeons. But it didn't quite work out that way. Someone, however, cast a spell on the cage that rivaled the lower levels of Gringotts. So much for my cunning escape plan.
So, what have you been doing all these days?
Regulus's eyes widened. Yeah, I was under lock and key, eating whatever they gave me, trying to learn to speak so I could ask for freedom, Sergei nodded. I even managed to pronounce our family name, but they didn't understand me. Not surprising, I was a black raven, after all. Snape coughed, as if suppressing laughter.
And how did you escape?
Well, today, my raven owner decided to teach me how to fly. By the way, that's a whole topic. Flying is actually really cool. Although, at first, I was afraid I'd crash and end up as a ball of feathers. You see, in Animagus transformation, if you let instincts take over, things can go south quickly, and you might end up permanently that way. So, you have to stay in control. But I'm still human. It's not that simple to control a body that's unfamiliar.
Well, that makes sense. So, did you learn to fly and take off?
Well, something like that. My raven owner got distracted by James and the others, and I barely had time to intervene and stop another duel of the century. Yes, I told the guys that I was with you for family matters these days, and that you forced me. They inferred it themselves. I didn't actually say it, to promise not to bother our mutual friend. They swore a great truce to me.
Were you trying to bribe me with that?
Snape finally voiced his thoughts on the situation.
Generosity from Black himself? Protecting me from your own gang? I don't need protection.
Of course, you don't need it. I'm more about protecting the guys, since I don't intend to participate in such foolishness anymore, Sergei nodded, prepared for something like this. But really, it was only to keep them out of your and my business. I wanted to teach my brother Animagus magic. I need help with potion practices since everything keeps slipping out of my hands due to the concussion. In exchange for that, I'm willing to teach both you and my brother Animagus magic. After the defense against the dark arts lesson, Sergei made his way to the second floor. Snape had agreed to the knowledge exchange. They didn't become friends, but they were no longer enemies either. Their free time schedule allowed Snape to show and teach Sergei how to cut, crush, and dissect ingredients during the second class. They went through some recipes from the textbook. However, actual brewing wasn't possible due to the lack of a proper lab and the requirement of over an hour and a half. They transfigured the ingredients to make it visual and comprehensible, how things looked, how to slice or grind them properly, and the sequence of steps. They threw everything into an illusion-covered cauldron filled with water, providing a clear view of how the concoction should appear. Sergei suggested working with illusions, having found these spells in Sirius's memories, and he effectively demonstrated this teaching tool. This approach clarified the processes, what might happen if done out of order, and how to rectify it, very convenient. Snape even praised him, saying that this method could be used to teach students without wasting valuable ingredients. At least yesterday, Sergei brewed his potion based on this method, and it looked exactly as described in the textbook. After lunch, together with Severus, Regulus would come to the second-floor office. They practiced, meditated, and tried to sense the animal for animagi transformation. During the fourth period, when Severus went to teach charms, Sergei worked individually with his brother, and during the fifth period, with Severus. Similar joint sessions occurred on Sundays. A new full moon was approaching, and according to all indications, the boys should manage their first transformation. Sergei entered the office, noticing that Snape hadn't arrived yet, although he usually came early, preparing the lesson, and transfiguring various items into ingredients. Sergei pondered, trying to recall if Snape had been in the Great Hall that morning. Some sixth-year students preferred not to attend breakfast, having food brought to them by friends or juniors. James had been talking about his Quidditch practice and distracted him. Sergei waited for about 20 minutes and began to worry. Snape might sarcastically comment on his missteps, make snide remarks, and be malicious, but he never arrived late. Maybe the bored marauders decided to have some fun and ambushed the relaxed Slytherin somewhere. After hesitating for a couple of minutes, Sergei decided to go down to the dungeons and ask his brother if he had seen Snape. "Hey, Burke." Sergei managed to recall the surname of the prefect from their sixth year, who happened to be coming out of the common room.
"Black? What do you want? Gryffindors aren't welcome here."
"Could you call my brother?" Sergei asked and added, "Please. And by the way, have you seen Snape?"
"Why do you need Snape? Regulus definitely isn't here in the common room. I saw him heading to the library. So, you should also head out of here."
"Did you see Snape or not?" Sergei rolled his eyes at these childish provocations.
"No, I didn't see Snape, just his familiar. I was looking for him myself, wanted to tell him that I found his bird, as the guy said he flew away."
Burke hesitated and bit his lip.
"Anyway, go away, Black. There's neither Snape nor your brother here."
Sergei turned around, and even took a couple of steps away from the portrait entrance to Slytherin when it struck him that Snape couldn't have a familiar, because there it was, a crank, right in front of him. Could it be true? Sergei froze, struck by the realization, and then dashed to the Gryffindor Tower. James, he called his friend who was reading a Transfiguration book along with Lily Evans.
"What?"
"I need to talk, let's go to your room," Sergei summoned his friend. Potter followed him and looked at him inquiringly from beneath his Lennon-like glasses. "I need your invisibility cloak. Just for a moment. It's for something important. I'll return it immediately. Don't ask why. It's really crucial." For a while, they stared into each other's eyes, then Potter sighed.
"Fine."
He shrugged.
"I'll get it for you."
October 6, 1976. Scotland, Hogwarts. Bam! Severus hit his head against the cage bars, where he had been placed in raven form by his satisfied neighbors. At that moment, he wished he could peck out the eyes of Mulciber and Avery. What the hell were they poking their noses into his business for? The cage was magically reinforced, and getting out on his own was not an option. Bam! The neighbors left, leaving him to wait for Snape as if he, meaning Snape, would show up. Severus squawked in frustration. How foolish! He couldn't believe he had fallen for this so foolishly. He had stepped into a puddle. Him! The smartest student in the class. No, it simply couldn't be true. He refused to believe it and wanted to wake up. Bam! Severus hit his head again and decided to hold off on self-torture for now, making sure that it wasn't a dream. But still, how? How could this possibly have happened? And he hadn't believed Sirius Black that something so idiotic could happen with Animagi. And why had he turned into a raven specifically? Severus opened his beak and, choking with irritation and rage, let out a series of short curses. He felt a bit better. At least theoretically, he could speak. He could try to convince the neighbors to open the cage, and then... Damn it! Severus cursed again, remembering that for the initial transformation back, he would need Black. Sirius, of course, openly explained how to reverse it, but doing it for the first time was incredibly difficult. It required an understanding of a very high level, and there might not be enough time for that. That's why there was a specific spell to turn an Animagus back into a human, but it required knowing who the Animagus was and who the human was. It wouldn't work for just anyone. And if Black didn't know who he had turned into? And the neighbors could simply cast silencing charms or block the cage, so even the spell wouldn't help. The only option would be to escape somehow and reach Black to let him know that Crank was him. Snape! Severus shouted his last name. Black! He tried to say help several times, but it came out as squawking. Idiot! Like all curses, this one worked too. But the situation still remained absurd and hopeless. And the thought of how that damned Black would laugh at him filled Severus with dread. The full moon was approaching. It was reasonable to assume that it wouldn't end well. And why had he suddenly felt the urge to practice Animagi before Black's arrival in the morning? Most likely, it was the same urge that prompted the Pixies to bring Andrew Burke to the office just a few minutes after his sudden and spontaneous transformation. How could this even happen? Severus looked at the cage bars again, contemplating whether to hit them once more. Maybe then he would die quicker, and this stupid tragicomedy would end. The Slytherin prefect, as it turned out, had recognized him as Snape's familiar and, satisfied and cheerful, informed Severus that now your master will have to help me with my charms essay, and dragged him to their room. To hell with you and your essay, Burke. Severus decided with grim glee. Several times, someone knocked on the door, but Avery and Malsaber were absent. There was a clever password on the door that could only be opened with magic, so even hypothetically, if Sirius Black tried to catch him. Severus smirked. Black's story about losing a part of his memory made him highly suspicious. Severus was always waiting for the catch, the moment when this audacious aristocrat would reveal himself. Perhaps Black grew tired of pretending, and... Severus even believed that Black might have initiated all of this with the Animagus transformation to somehow trap him. Maybe to make him his familiar. And it would be fine if only temporarily. Otherwise, it could turn into something like, look, everyone, I have my own Snape. Someone like Black could easily get revenge for those 3 days in the cage, and there would be no consequences. After all, there was already one werewolf attack, and he was still walking around the school as if nothing happened. That's why Severus initially planned to take everything he could, learning from what Sirius taught Regulus, and perform the transformation himself, quietly and slowly. He wanted to learn how to control it independently, maybe by Christmas when all of Slytherin would go home for the holidays, leaving him alone. Severus didn't want Black to know about his Animagus form at all.
It seems Snape still hasn't shown up,
Malsaber said. He and Avery entered the room for their books before the 4th lesson. Severus gave a grim look to his neighbors, who didn't even think of bringing some food for the bird. Meanwhile, his stomach was grumbling from hunger.
He's probably cooking potions somewhere. Let's tell him about his crow at the charms.
It's a raven.
Malsaber corrected Avery and approached the cage.
Hey, little bird, say, Snape.
Idiot! Severus retorted, debating whether to peck at someone's finger, but he didn't dare. They might cast a spell on him until his arrival. Avery burst into laughter.
This is not like talking to a parrot. Okay, let's go, we're already late.
The neighbors left. Severus was about to resume his self-torture and knock his head against the cage again when suddenly the doors were pushed open. He initially thought one of the neighbors had forgotten something, but no one followed from the corridor. Then the cage slightly shook, the door opened, and Severus thought his hunger had started causing hallucinations because the head of Black appeared in the middle of the room. Just the head without the rest of his body. The sight was quite something.
Severus, is that you?
I'm Snape. Just in case it wasn't a complete hallucination, Severus confirmed.
Get out of the cage, I'll turn you back into a human.
A hand with a wand appeared a little away from the head, and Severus realized it was some kind of artifact, like an invisibility cloak. He had seen something similar at a shop on Diagon Alley. He got out of the cage and hopped onto the floor, extending his wings. Why not? Severus hadn't tried flying, but he was confident he could manage it. At least, folding and unfolding his wings worked right away. If Burke hadn't shown up, he might have even managed to return to human form by himself. He wasn't a fool like Potter or a quiet one like Pettigrew. And now this Gryffindor Black would probably see himself as a hero and a savior.
Try to remember the sensations,
Black advised, aiming his wand at him. Severus felt extremely uncomfortable being under someone's wand, but he had to endure. The spells for turning back into a human were nonverbal. He was enveloped in a bright blue light, felt the reverse transformation, and became himself again.
All right, you need rest after the magic. I better go.
Quickly glancing at him as if making sure everything was all right, Black muttered.
Regulus is waiting for me. Maybe he'll achieve something today too.
Severus watched as Black once again hid under his cloak. The door opened and closed. It struck him a little late that they hadn't asked him for anything, hadn't chided him for recklessness, or asked for gratitude for saving him. It was as if it were taken for granted that he wouldn't get a simple thank you. He, of course, had no intention of thanking them and even prepared a small speech about how he would have managed on his own, but none of it was necessary. It was kind of offensive, actually.
I thought you wouldn't show up.
Sirius looked at him with a slight surprise as Severus entered the classroom on the second floor after the spells. At the very least, I owe myself another potions lesson that we missed this morning. Has Regulus already left?
No, he's here.
Black smiled.
He succeeded too.
A handsome black cat jumped onto the desk, large, fluffy, with yellow eyes. A true black, Severus joked, examining Regulus' Animagus form.
Yes, Black Blackie.
Sirius scratched under the cat's chin. The animal emitted a raspy purr, tilting its head and neck for more scratching.
Well, I'll scratch and pet you some more later. But now, try to transform back on your own, this time I won't help. Concentrate.
The cat gave a short meow, leaped off the desk, and transformed back into Regulus in midair.
I saw McGonagall do something like this. Hi, Severus.
Hello. At least, no one will try to cage you. A cat is a cool Animagus form.
I think so too. By the way, when they scratch and pet you, it's actually very pleasant. So.
Understood, understood.
Sirius chuckled softly.
You'll come to me when you urgently need some scratching. Snape shouldn't be the only one with a familiar.
Oh, by the way, where were you this morning?
Severus was surprised, as he thought that his blunder had already become known, at least to Hogwarts if not to everyone. And surely Regulus knew.
Well, I bragged to Severus, and that's enough from you.
Sirius cut off the topic's development and ruffled his brother's hair.
Go on, Reg, we still need to work.
Alright, see you.
Regulus nodded and left the classroom. So you didn't tell him? Severus squinted.
If you want to, you can tell him yourself.
Sirius retorted.
Let's get down to the long-lasting elixirs, all right? And maybe you'll have time to practice Animagi before my spells.
Severus nodded, agreeing with those plans, and mentally noting that he might have been wrong about Black. Maybe he could be a normal person, not just an arrogant git. After dinner, Severus whispered to Regulus to call his brother. When Black, having parted with his friends, finally approached him, Severus, amazed by his own boldness, offered, "How about flying together sometime? Sunday morning, maybe?"
Really?
Sirius grinned widely.
Sure. So, see you on Sunday, as usual.
The phrase "as usual" caught his attention. As if they were friends arranging a regular meeting. Severus nodded and hurried to the dungeons, convincing himself that he was the one taming Black in order to have the opportunity to experiment on his werewolf friend. He really wanted to create a werewolf antidote himself. If only he had the ingredients. Perhaps he should subtly mention his research during his lessons with Black, but the topics of their sessions were too far from werewolves. Moreover, he didn't want Black to get angry and stop teaching him Animagus magic. Now that threat had passed, he could try to pique Black's interest instead of just giving away all his work and calculations to Damocles Belby, whom Severus had already contacted regarding lycanthropic potions. Without connections, without money, no patent was in sight for Severus, and he understood that perfectly. Besides, he wouldn't come of age until January next year. Magical patents were reviewed by a special committee only once a year, from November to December. So, Severus was furious. At best, he could hand over his calculations to a known potion maker who held influence in society, owned a laboratory, and had test subjects. Then he could hope that his name would be mentioned somewhere. Alternatively, after Hogwarts, he could try to become an apprentice to the same Belby, although Severus couldn't understand how, in 20 years of research, Belby hadn't thought to mix aconite and deadly nightshade. This made him even more frustrated. On the other hand, he seemed to have a deal with Black, but he could propose continuing their lessons in exchange for the necessary ingredients for his experiments. Severus' mood improved, and he thought that maybe he should indeed help Burke with his essay on charms, which he had hinted at throughout Professor Flitwick's class.